Hey everybody, it's Mike Sherwood and welcome to my YouTube channel, Don't Waste Your Life, where we ask you to be present, to be happy, and to be thankful. If you're new to the channel, I ask you to subscribe below, and if you're returning, thanks for coming back. So in this video, I'm going to go through rental real estate, more specifically, just different ways to invest in real estate. A lot of people have asked me, hey, how did you get started in real estate? And what do you suggest to somebody who's starting out? So this video is going to go through different techniques and strategies and what I would recommend that you do. Each of these strategies have different advantages and disadvantages. And so in this video, that's what I'm going to try to go through. And I will say that there's also some new things in the market that have happened or that have been created since I started investing. So I will also try to talk about those and give my 2 cents on those. So one thing to note is that like any investment, there is a chance you could lose money. So one thing I will say and caution you about is if somebody says that something is a sure thing, I recommend that you run away and run away very fast because there really is no sure thing in this life. So the first strategy is flipping. The nice part about flipping is that you can quickly bankroll money, just meaning that as you continue to do multiple projects over time, you're going to be able to build up significant capital. The other thing with being able to bankroll more money over time is that eventually you'll be able to do multiple flips at the same time. So there's a way that this can kind of compound like interest. With the larger inflation rates currently happening and the real estate market being extremely hot, this strategy is really good. The challenge is you might have a hard time finding a house to flip, but this is a really good strategy if you can find properties other people can't find. On the disadvantage side, you really need some skills and some serious skills, especially if you're doing all this yourself. If you're doing all this yourself, you really need to be dedicated and you need to be able to do a lot of the project management, the managing of all the finances and expenses. There's a lot that goes into this. So that's why I recommend really building a team in order to be able to do this strategy. One other thing to consider is that there is tax implications for when you continue to do this strategy. So it's something you need to talk to your CPA about. Another thing to consider is that in order to continue to make money, you need to continue to do this kind of work. Now, if you've scaled up enough, potentially you may be able to get around having to be as involved. But if you're starting out, if you stop working, you're going to stop making money. So on the rental side, this is where you'd buy real estate, you get tenants and they would be paying your mortgage by paying rent or covering your other expenses. This is one of the strategies that I employ. The thing that I love about it is that there's an inflationary hedge built in. So as inflation goes up, my rent is going to go up. So as expenses go up over time, your income's going to go up. The other thing is there's multiple exit strategies. So the other thing is the market value of these properties could actually increase significantly. And you can turn around and sell these for a nice profit if that's what you're looking to do. So it allows multiple exit strategies for the investor. The other thing to consider is that if you set up this properly, it really can allow you to make passive income. If you have the correct team in place, you can just collect your money every month if that's what you want to do. So on the disadvantages side, you need to have a bankroll and a serious bankroll, and you need to have credit because you're not going to be able to just buy these properties outright unless you're independently wealthy. And then if you're independently wealthy, why are you listening to me then? One other thing is that it's difficult to scale up. So like if you buy one property and you want to try to buy another property, it can take some time in order for that to happen. You are on the hook more from a liability perspective, actually owning the property and having tenants in there. From a liability perspective, it's much higher. So again, I would consult your insurance and attorney on what they recommend for this. And if you actually get too large, you may have to pull in a property manager in order to manage the property on your behalf. Now, this can be a good and a bad thing because when you hire the property manager, you do lose a little bit of control. But at the same time, a lot of those headaches are no longer your headaches. They're your property manager's headaches. This strategy tends to make money more slowly, but it actually makes money while you sleep, which is something my grandma always said that's really nice to be able to do is while everybody else is sleeping, you're going to make money over time. Versus some of the other stuff, it's very transactional. One last final thing to consider is that you need to allocate funds in order to cover expenses, unexpected expenses related to the property. If you don't do this, it can have some serious ramifications. So short-term or vacation homes. With the advent of Airbnb, this has become a very popular strategy where you can have somebody come in and stay for a short time and you can collect the money and they just go there to vacation or to be able to be there for a short time. Of course, because of technology, this has become very prevalent, and it's not a strategy that I originally invested in, but I'm in the process of getting into. Honestly, if you're in a very good location, it can be very lucrative. But like anything, I feel like it's very important to have local boots on the ground and somebody you trust to be able to take care of your property if you're not going to be able to be nearby full time. This strategy also employs an iterative approach. So if you find that particular strategy isn't working, there's always a new person that's going to be moving in or staying in for a short time, so you can iterate quickly and try new strategies and get immediate feedback. Versus long-term rentals, this is completely different, where you have somebody staying for a long period of time. You can also take advantage of these rentals for your own purposes. So if you want to use this for a family trip or family vacation, you can use that, or friends. That's the advantage of this, is this strategy will allow you to use these for your own benefit, not just renting it out. So on the disadvantages side, similar to like the long-term rentals, you need a bankroll and you need credit to be able to buy these properties. Similar to the other rentals, you are also on the hook more from a liability perspective. And in many of these places, they want these to be fully furnished, which can cause some issues. So for example, if you have people that are renting this and they tend to be a little rowdy, you really need to have a way to recapture in case there's damage, recapture money. If for some reason somebody breaks something or is damaged, or issues with the neighbors. Which leads me to another issue, is that a lot of areas are now frowning upon Airbnbs. They don't allow them in HOAs, or they don't allow them in certain ranges of a city limits. So this is something you need to check with your local HOAs, and you check with your government information to understand if they even allow Airbnbs in those areas. I have two final disadvantages. One is that this business tends to be seasonal. So there'll be times of the year when you would tend to make more money, and other times of the year when you may not. Not every property has this, but I would say most of them do. So that also leads to the second item, which is if you have a property manager, it can actually get very, very expensive, especially if you're paying for somebody to do like a super host. These people are people that have been doing this type of strategy for some time, and they have special benefits, and that's what you're paying for as a host. So just keep that in mind, that you need to calculate this into your model to understand what's going to be profitable or not. Commercial real estate. Commercial real estate is quite a bit different in that it's for businesses. So for example, like the place I play badminton at, I'm sure that they have a lease there. So they're leasing that particular place. The nice part about these places when you are renting them out is that many of them have escalators built in as far as revenue. So for example, if the company that's renting the place is starting to make more money, then you can charge more rent. Or for example, a lot of the maintenance is actually covered by the tenant, not by the landlord. So there's some stuff that's very beneficial to the owner of the property that you need to take into consideration, including if they want to remodel, the person that's leasing the place actually needs to pay for all that. So if you are able to do this, this is a very good strategy. But one thing I would say, it's very niche. And so I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So as I was mentioning, that this market's very niche. So if you have a certain type of building or a certain quality of a building, it'll attract a certain type of tenant. And so there's always a chance that when your place is vacant, it could be vacant for a very long time. This is not like a residential real estate where everybody's going to need a place. With this, depending upon the quality of your property and the type of your property, it could stay vacant for a very long time, or you may even have to knock it down and rebuild, which I've seen some investors have to do in order to attract better tenants. So the next part is going to be around non-ownership. And I'm going to go over this in more generalized terms, but non-ownership means that you're not actually buying any real estate for yourself, or you're not transacting any real estate for yourself. You may be doing it on behalf, or you're bringing a meeting of the minds and you're bringing people to the table in order to do the real estate. So you're not actually possessing it. So the advantage of this particular type of strategy is that you really don't need any money to get started. Depending upon what strategy you're going for, some of them have licensing requirements and some don't. So it really depends upon what you do. And it can be an advantage or a disadvantage depending upon what you're trying to accomplish. For example, as a real estate agent or a property manager, in most states, you have to have a license. So it's an advantage that if you have a license, there are other people that cannot do what you're doing because they have to have a license in order to do that. On the other hand, if you're doing some assignment contracts, there doesn't tend to be any requirements. So you can get started immediately and be able to start working in the area. But again, that also means that there's room for competition to come in quickly and to take over. Just something to consider. On the disadvantages side, also, it can be a very intensive business. It can be very time consuming and repetitive in order to do some of this work. And potentially some of this may not have a payoff. So it can be very hit or miss until you get your strategy just right. As mentioned previously, some of these strategies in this non-ownership space tend to be complementary to some of the other businesses, which is how I've set up our business with Charles and I, for example. So bird dogging or assignments, this is where you're going to go out and you're going to try to find motivated sellers on your own. Basically, you're driving for doors or driving for dollars. You're going out and trying to find people that are willing to sell to you, and then you're going to try to turn that over and flip it to somebody else. The challenge is that in order to find these deals, it can require a lot of work, a lot of hours. But the thing is you don't need any money up front to do this. That's the advantage. But you really need to understand cold calling strategies to basically get people to want to work with you and trust you. The other thing is that's nice about this strategy is that you don't necessarily have a lot of skin in the game if you have a good contract. So that's something you'll have to consider when you're doing these assignments. So another option is the short-term rental or vacation rentals, similar to the Airbnb without a license. This is where you have to be very careful because depending upon the state, it could actually require a license to be able to manage these particular rentals. So you really need to check this out before you get involved. But the most important thing to do is when you're doing this is understand what your value proposition is and what you bring to the table. Because if you don't have that, it can be very hard to be successful in that part of the business. Property management, which is what I actually do. In many cases, it can be a very complementary business to other areas that you'd have going on. Similar to like buying and selling, you can help your owners buy and sell property on behalf of them. So there's a lot of advantages of being a property manager and being a real estate agent together, for example. The challenge is sometimes you can deal with some very interesting personalities. It can be a very labor intensive business, meaning you have to have a lot of people in order to do it. And it can be high turnover. There's a lot of challenges in property management. One thing I will say is because you are actively managing on behalf of other investors, you will also learn the way that they approach their business. So there's a lot that can be learned from a different perspective here. So similar to this is also the real estate agent. Real estate agents allows you to see a perspective that you wouldn't get from some of these other investment opportunities. You get to do the buying and the selling, but you're helping other people. But in many cases, you got to be willing to give up your nights and weekends and holidays to be successful. So these are all things to consider when being a real estate agent. And of course, you have to have a license. So that's a way to stand out and differentiate yourself, is like you have to have that in order to be a real estate agent. One last thing is sometimes it can be very hard to just do this strategy on its own and make money and be successful. And it really depends upon the market conditions and the market itself. Lease to buy. Well, unfortunately, I'm not as familiar with this strategy. This is something I've seen some people do with some success, which is where you would buy a property and you would sell it to a person that may not have the credit or the funds upfront to buy the place. And so the idea is you are working with them to set a plan in place to help them take over and buy the property. The advantage is if you get this set up correctly, you can get in and out of real estate pretty quickly. You're just helping fill in the gaps for the market where opportunities exist. The challenge, I would say, is that you need to be mindful of laws as far as like predatory lending and different things, because there is a chance you could actually keep the deposit if for some reason they are unable to pay. But you really need to work with an attorney to make sure everything you're doing is legal and proper in this strategy. But I've seen some people be successful. I just have never done this myself. So REITs. REITs is basically a real estate investment trust where they invest in real estate on behalf of you. So they take the funds and pool together and they buy different real estate options. The good thing is the stuff that's publicly traded they actually had to pay back most of the return as dividends to the owners of the REIT. The disadvantage is you don't really get to choose what they're investing in, but I will say that usually they have a prospectus, so you kind of have an understanding of what their management investment philosophy is. The other thing is like you can't use these for any benefit. So it's not like where you can buy a REIT and then you are able to use it for like vacation or other stuff. This is purely an investment play. The good news is with this strategy is it tends to have more scrutiny as far as like with REITs. There's somebody, like the SEC that's actually looking at how these REITs are set up and how they're working versus the other strategy of a REIT is you could do a crowdfunded or private source where companies or individuals are investing in real estate and it's a completely private party. And so what that means is like you really need to understand how the management operating structure, how can you get out of the agreement? You really need to understand all the ins and outs of the agreement. So then that way you can be protected and you can understand like, hey, if I need to sell out, what are my options? So this is something that in the private side, there's a lot of flexibility because it could allow you to potentially buy a couple investment properties where you could use them for part of your purposes for like your family, for example. So it's just something to consider. This is actually a strategy I've been currently exploring and looking at. So the last option is hard money lending. This is not something I've done, but I've seen other people do, which is where they basically lend their money out to investors that are doing a short-term project or they're just trying to get something financed. So I can think of two examples. If you're flipping a property and you need money for an operating budget, that's what you could use hard money lending for. You can go to them, borrow the money temporarily, and then once the property is finished, you pay them back. Or if, for example, you're doing a buy and hold, but first you have to renovate it, then what you could do is you could just essentially go and fix the property with the money that they gave you and then refinance it through the bank. So there's a lot of options. And as far as like the rates can be very attractive. We can be as low as 12%, but I've heard of 20 or 25% because it's all privately done. One really nice thing about this is you are not the one that's taking the risk. You're not the one that's doing all the work to be able to do all this. So you're getting a cut of the pie, but you have to have the bankroll and the money to be able to do this. So what is my strategy and what is my choice and why? I'll talk a little bit about that. So some of you know, I started investing in real estate in 2007, 2008. When I first started investing, I bought this beat up, rundown duplex and I lived in part of it and I rented out the top unit and I also house hacked and had a person living with me. I gave them the biggest room. I took the smallest room. So a lot of my expenses were completely covered by the people that were staying in there, which was very nice. My strategy was to buy one house every year and get an FHA loan. This was the time when we had no doc loans and you're able to do a lot of the stuff that you're not able to do now. Because that strategy changed and that loophole closed, I took on a partner, Charles, and we started buying in rental real estate in areas that we knew, properties that made sense, and we're doing all the work ourselves. So we're just starting from the very beginning and just figuring it out as we would go and make it up as we go and make a lot of mistakes. And again, I'll talk about some of that in future videos, but that's really how I got started. And then eventually we decided to go into property management where we took on our very first client. And once that happened, I got my license and then eventually got my brokerage and I started helping our investors buy and sell properties, help manage for them. So those are those complementary businesses that I was talking about before. So over time, we started to scale up the business. We continued to buy more rental properties on our side. We were managing on behalf of other investors. While this strategy may have been very time consuming to be able to grow organically, at this time I was in my 20s. I didn't have a lot going on. Well, I did have a lot going on, but it was a different had a lot going on than to what I have now. But I had ambition. I had the time to be able to do all this stuff and I loved it. I wanted to do it. And so, because I had a smaller bankroll, I had to hustle. I had to work very, very hard in order to get what I wanted. So again, this strategy worked for me, but it may not work for you. So if you're interested in talking through what strategies I think might work, I'm planning on discussing some of that in a future video. But if you'd like to reach out, please contact me. I'd love to hear from you. I mean, this is what I love, so what do I think will happen with real estate investments in the future? I will consider that they will still be a viable option to do in the future. So, is it too late? I don't think it's ever too late. There can be different times to maximize for different strategies. So the strategy that I employed, if I tried to do it now, it'd be much harder. Or given certain markets, it may not work. So you really need to understand your market and be able to figure out how you approach it. Hope this was useful to you guys. Take care.